everyone's computer. Okay, it's too early in the morning to be irritated at Zoom. Cool, all right, so we're going to play around with the repositories. So what I want everyone to do this morning is to clone this down. So I'm going to throw this into the chat, and you can do this as I'm talking, or you can just watch my screen afterwards. And the Zoom overlay is now also gone. It's one of the most frustrating experiences with Zoom at the moment. Okay, I'll just put in your Slack channel, so you can ignore that. So we're going to clone this down, and we're going to walk through it. So I have already cloned it down, and what this is an application that has a very simple API and has a JavaScript front end.
Sorry, a very quick question. Should we just clone it, or should we fork it? Are we going to be pairing?
You will be pairing on it, so you'll pair up because I want you to do some exploratory work together. So it's up to you if you want to fork it, but if you want to fork it, you won't be able to receive a lot of the changes or any of the changes. So usually it's better practice just to clone it at the moment.
Okay, it's just because it's going to be harder for us to share it back and forth between pairs if we clone it.
Up to you. So if you think that it'll be easier, go ahead and fork it. There's always going to be a trade-off between being able to extend it by yourselves or not. So the main objective for this session is I want you to be able to spend the first half of what we're going to do just diagramming and building out a model in your head by diagramming with your pair partner, by sort of exploring, by logging things about how this works. And I'll demonstrate it myself, and then it'll be up to you to do it. And then we're going to get back and we're going to play around with it. So that's going to be the scope of this morning. And by the end of this morning, we should be able to describe how a front-end application, JavaScript, interacts with an API. Let's open it up first. So we start off, as you might imagine, with a config.ru. Anastasis,
yeah.
What does this file do?
The config, it runs the app.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. It requires everything that it needs, and then runs the app. So this is responsible for creating the server and loading your app. So if we go into our app, we can see that we have this file, the app.rb, which requires all the right files. And there are two parts to this. We have all the Sinatra stuff. And then on line 5, we require the weather controller. So I'll talk about this in a second, but let's go to the app controllers, weather controller. We have one main route here. Amy, what does this route do?
It's loading the index.
Yeah. Good job. Nice, easy question. Yeah.
It opens the front page, the index.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. I probably should put a G in there rather than be too cavalier about that. Cool. So let's have a look at the index. We go into views and we index. and we have some HTML. Amit, what things happen in this HTML? So when you read through this, what things can you pick out? You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute, buddy.
We're loading the weather in the app JavaScript file,
Nice.
and we're also loading jQuery as a package.
Nice. Exactly right. And there's one other thing here that might be worth pointing out.
We've given an ID of app, and we've just put loading.
Exactly. So this pattern is quite common in front-end apps, where you start off with a single element, and the idea is we're going to insert into this element other elements, and we'll create that using JavaScript. Cool. Those things, the main things that we picked out, we load, as you said, jQuery as a package. We load our 2 JavaScript files, and we're going to insert into this. So let's have a look at the JavaScript. This is in the public folder. Sinatra needs a public folder to consume JavaScript. So let's have a look. Let's start off with the weather. Actually, let's start off with the app. Ellen, can you read through line by line what's happening here?
We're adding an event listener for the load of the page on line 3. And establishing a callback of what will happen once the page is loaded.
Cool.
And what will happen.
That's the callback, everything in here. Yep.
Yep. So what will happen once the page has loaded is that we'll log that the window has loaded. We will define an element by its ID app, which is that div that we had on the HTML page. We will log that so that we can see it. We will create a new weather object assigned to the variable weather. So I'm guessing that we'll see that in the weather.javascript file. And we are passing it a couple of arguments. Looks like we're passing it, I don't know quite what the dollar is. I think of that as meaning jQuery. And the element, the app div. Then we are seeing what that weather object now is. And then we are calling a render method on weather, which I'm guessing is also a method that we'll find in the weather.javascript file. And finally, logging that we are now all done.
Cool. So a couple of things here might be like where this comes from, but so far, any questions? Like we're just reading through it at the moment.
Presume this is the instance of the weather class.
Yeah.
It's been created.
So this is on the right-hand side, and this is creating the instance.
But why you're passing it as an argument?
Which one?
The $sign.
Cool. So the dollar, as Ellen pointed out, is jQuery. So in our index.html, this loads jQuery. So we have available to us the $sign. The $sign is essentially the namespace, the object that holds all of jQuery's functionality. So if I, well, let's load it up and have a look. We'll see a lot of the console logs in a second. Was it localhost 1992? So I've loaded this page, the index.erb. And so when we've loaded jQuery, I have access to all of jQuery using this $variable. This holds everything in jQuery, so I could do anything that I wanted to. You've been probably doing it so far where you do like this, right? You get like the app element. You've been like targeting elements using jQuery with your thermostat, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So using the $ is how we do it. We just use a $ to access using jQuery. So think of it like a class or a function that we use to then access jQuery stuff. So if we want to use it, we use $ and then something, and so I can pass it around in different classes to get access to it. And the reason why I'm passing it as an argument, because in my class weather, I might want to mock it in a test. So I don't have to send a GET request through jQuery. I can just stub it out using my own method. So it's usually good practice to pass in any dependencies as an argument. I wouldn't need to, because $ is still available to me since I've loaded it on the page. So I could just do it directly. But as always, rather than hard code dependencies, let's pass them in via arguments. So it's a good question. So the first step of it, we load it from our script and we have access to it. And then once we've loaded it, we can pass it into objects as needed as an argument.
I didn't really so it's almost like imagining, I guess, if jQuery was another class.
Exactly.
And yeah, but then what did you? I'm just trying to think how. Oh, and then you'd be like, how? I'm just trying to think how you'd mock it. Is it you're going to do a double of it or something?
Exactly. Yeah. Because the only thing this is, right, is it has a get method, so I can just have an object with a get method.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
It's much simpler. Like there's a little bit of an abstraction around this, right? But it's just simply an object that has a method get, and then we can replace it.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I want to just pause here to make sure that we're still feeling okay so far about this walkthrough. Yeah. A couple nods.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's cover where we came from. So we started with the entry point, our rackup file that says require all the files and then run the app. We had a look at requiring all the files necessary. We went into the app, the route that says load the index page, our HTML page loads jQuery and then loads our other JavaScript. And we went to our app that says listen to the load event and make sure the page is loaded first before we target elements on the page. And create the weather, get it to render, and then we're done. So then we went to the weather. Sabir, can you read through the weather class? And what does the constructor function do?
It's calling on the instance of weather class using the $sign.
So what does line 5 do?
Line 5 just prints weather class is instantiated.
Nice. And what does line 6 do?
It's calling on that class.
Cool. So remember, a constructor function is like the initialize method in a Ruby class. It just sets the internal properties. So we have two internal properties. We have dollar as a property and we have element as a property. And we set the dollar property equal to the dollar, and we set the element property equal to element as whatever they come in through the arguments.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So it's exactly the same as using, the way to think about this is the same as using initialize method in Ruby, where we have two arguments and we set the two arguments to be instance variables.
Mhm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Anastasis, what happens in the render method here?
In the render method, we are requesting to get the weather data.
Mm-hmm. From where?
From the API current weather.
Cool. We'll have a look at that in a second. And then what happens?
And then we're going to pass to, we're going to print on the screen the inquiry get callback and the data. Data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're going to pass the data that we found
Mm-hmm.
into this element in our HTML.
Cool. Now there's a step here. What's going on in this step? We don't have to know too much about it, but what do you think is happening here? Still on you, Anastasis.
Once the callback is being made,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to pass successfully. I think it's going to pass the data.
Cool. So this assumes that this data is in JSON. It's in a notation that we have to transform it into something that we can manipulate. So we'll have a look at what this data is in a second, but usually the common pattern is information between the back end and the front end is in JSON, a type of data. And we have to parse it, P-A-R-S-E, parse, to understand what it is. And then we can use like normal JavaScript to access different properties. This is because, let's have a look at the example data. This by itself is the example data that we're using. And this is not in JavaScript, right? This is in JSON. So if we wanted to use it as properties and values like normal JavaScript, we have to parse it. And this is common across multiple languages. So we send data in JSON, and then whatever receives it, parses it. So in our weather class, we make a request, we get that data, and then we parse it so we can use it. And we use it in the moment just by accessing different properties. When you run it yourselves and clone it, you'll see all these logs, and you can add your own logs as you do it. But these console logs are like your starting framework to sort of like have a look at what's happening, the order which things are happening, and you can explore as much as you want. Cool. So you're exactly right, Anastasis. The render makes the request. When it gets that data, it then parses it and then sets the inner HTML to it, which is why we see on our screen the current weather temperature in Kelvin. Fancy that. It's like minus 270 or something, right? 270 odd. So it's probably about 10 degrees Celsius at the moment, or according to this data set. Okay, pause here for any thoughts or questions about what we're looking at for this weather class. The next step is we're going to have a look at what exactly is happening at this API.
So the parse method transforms the data into readable
Exactly.
JavaScript.
Exactly. Exactly right. Cool. Okay, so what happens when we send this request to the API current weather? Well, we have our API here. Let's have a look at the controllers. This one's quite straightforward. We just register such a namespace, And this is the one that we should have a look at. We have an endpoint for current weather. So any request made to API current weather prints out in your server logs at the endpoint current weather. It reads data from this file, which we just had a look at, prints it out so you can see it yourself. Sets data to be 200 and then sends back the data. So I could have a look at the data myself just by going to that endpoint.api./api.currentweather. And that's the information that the API provides for us at the moment. It's just hard-coded at the moment as a file. You can imagine this in applications backed by database, and so rather than just reading from a file, it would read from a database.
What's line 9?
Line 9.
Yeah.
This is essentially the return value. So like you've been doing so far in here, where you send back the response as HTML.
Yeah.
In this one, we're sending back the response using JSON.
Okay, so you don't like. I didn't know why you can write like. I didn't know. I thought you maybe like do JSON capitals or like JSON.data. It's not like a method call or anything, is it? It's just.
It is exactly. It is a method, right? It's the same thing as doing this. In the same way that.
Oh, fine.
This is a method.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and JSON is a
yeah. This method I think is added
by Sinatra JSON, isn't it?
yeah.
from here.
Nice. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the model of how our normal client-server relationship works, the client makes a request, and so far our Ruby Sinatra applications have been sending back HTML. This API is not sending back HTML, it's sending back JSON.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's because we're going to do the HTML stuff on the browser side rather than the server side. And this is actually trying to decouple the front and the back end, trying to say, okay, these are two separate responsibilities. API just does data stuff, and the front end does what the user sees. And at the moment, we're just reading from a file, so feel free to change when you play around with it, you can change this as much as you want. So you can play around with it. There's just an example data set. I went to one of the free weather APIs. I think it's probably the same one that you have been using in the thermostat. You do need to sign up for it, but that's up to you if you want to play around with it. So we read it from this file over here, and then we send it back. The request is made from here. So as back to Anastasis, he said that we make the request to the API current weather, we get that data, and we parse it. And then we extract information from it. So if we have a look at parseData.main.temp, we can see in our JSON, when we parse it, it's going to coordinate with main temp. And so we'll get this information. There's a lot more here that you can extract if you want to. So let's have a look at it in the browser. So you can see the logs. We start off with app.js line 4. Window loaded. We load the app. So we log what the app element is. We log the weather class, and that is instantiated. Then the render function gets called. And at that point, the app is loaded. Notice the jQuery get callback is still executing, right? So the app loads, and we've sent the request, and then it comes back, and we print the data. we get the parse data. Can you see this data is in JSON, but then when it's parsed, it's now manipulable. We can access it using JavaScript and go into main and get the temperature. But you can, if you wanted to, you can display all the clouds. There are 75 clouds apparently. I'm not sure what that means, but there's probably some metric that the documentation could help. But it's just
The
information.
mparse data looks the same as the JSON data.
It's not quite. You're right. It's very similar because it's got the same information, but there are quotations around things that, and if there were more, like if we could see it specifically here, API current weather. So that's what the JSON looks like. It's all properly escaped with new line characters or with quotation marks. Right, so we need to unpack it, essentially unravel it back to JavaScript.
Is the object that it's turned into effectively JavaScript's equivalent of a hash?
Object. Remember, hash is Ruby. Yes.
Yeah, but that's an equivalent of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wait, so what's JSON and what is JSON and the difference between that and JavaScript?
And JavaScript's a programming language. JSON is a markup language.
Okay.
Right. So what that means is just wraps around data in order to provide it sort of more information about its structure. So we know, for example, that this information has this property, and this property has more properties and values, and we can send this information around. It's a way to keep the structure of the data, but just in text. So we can send this from different endpoints and pass it around. But it's not JavaScript. It's just a notation. Yeah, and it's an agreed on convention, like HTMLs and all these things are. It's just text, right, in a specific format. But lots of programming languages, almost all programming languages, can look at JSON, parse it, and then into its own format. So Ruby could pass this into a Ruby hash if it wanted to. JavaScript can pass it into JavaScript objects. Other languages can pass it into its own thing. It's like a common standard to say if you pass information, you can pass it as JSON.
And are we passing it into a Ruby hash or a JavaScript object?
When you tell me, when does the parsing happen?
In weather, right? So
Which one?
start, yeah. It happens in our weather class, which is a JavaScript file.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So backend Ruby just exposes things. JavaScript consumes. In order to consume it, this idea of like taking this information and using it, we have to parse it first and then manipulate it. So as Anastasia said, transform it. Ruby exposes this as JSON. Let's have a look on the left-hand side. Ruby exposes it as JSON, and then browser side, we parse it. Ruby exposes as JSON, JavaScript consumes it and parses it.
Sorry, I just don't know what you mean by this consuming.
We make a request. Essentially, imagine like big hand reaching out and taking the information and then like consuming it. And we gotta transform it to something that we can read.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason I talk about consuming is because this is the language that everyone says and speaks about when APIs expose information and front end consume it. So it's just the idea of exposing, pushing things out there, and then the front end pulling things.
Yeah.
And that's the image that you should have in your head. Cool. I mean, that's it for the walkthrough. That's all there is here. So what I want you to do in pairs is load this up, run through the logs, log more, and understand how information is being exposed by the API, how the front-end app is taking that information, manipulating it. And I want you to essentially create a diagram in your pair of the request response cycle. How is it working? Where's the data going? And then share it in the Slack channel. After that's happened, then I want you to play around with it so you can extract more information from this file. You can add more elements onto the page so you can have more of a weather dashboard and just play around with it. The main purpose is so we can understand how the back end works with the front end. So first step is in pairs, diagram it out. And I want to see as much information as possible about the diagram. You can use console.log. You can use put statements in the API to have a look at things. Here you can see when you run it, you can see the request gets made. You get at the endpoint and then all the information. So you have two sources of logs, the API logs and then the front end console logs. So you can sort of build up this picture of when the information is flowing across back and front. So send those diagrams into the Slack channel and make them as representative as you can about how this works. And then we'll gather back to talk about it, and then we'll play around and extend it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any confusions or thoughts or questions about what we're going to spend the next hour doing?
Not confused, but if
Yeah.
you don't mind sharing the video.
Sharing the video
Of this recording.
Cool. All right. I'll see how quickly I can get it up. All right. What are the pairs for today? The pairs are Ellen and Asas, Amy and Spear, Ellen and Amit. Cool. So let's gather back at about 11:30. And by then, please share your diagram into the Slack channel, or we'll talk about it at 11:30. And then we'll see what we can do to play around and extend it. I'm going to end this call so I can actually get the recording and then upload it to YouTube. So Anastasia, you'll be by yourself for a little bit, and then send me a link, a Zoom link, and I'll come chat with you, all right?
Okay.
Cool.
You've got my Zoom link, so I'll see you on there.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. That's
And
good.
just to make sure you have the link to the repository, it's in the
In Slack.
I think you sent it, right?
It's in
I
Slack.
might have sent it in Slack, or did I send it in Zoom chat?
You sent it in Slack.
Cool. Yeah. All right. See you folks at 11:30.